Hey, it's Chris, Liege Games. So, what are we talking about today? Hatchet Games, Studio H, Bauza, Vincent Dutrait, 2 to 4 players, 60 minutes, scenario-based, campaign-esque cooperative game with dice rolling ability checks in the lines of things you may have seen elsewhere. Let me tell you about it. Let me show you what it looks like on the table, and then let me show you my final thoughts. Let's do this. So what is Oltree? Oltree is a chronicle or book via the use of cards driven story mechanism game. So as the game advances, you will go through various obstacles that get laid onto the board in forms of incidences, problems, and events that are basically pandemic-esque going to get in your way. And then you make your way back circuitously to this chronicle deck. And depending on the length of the chronicle, depending on which scenario you choose, has a certain number of cards. And when you go there, you reveal the next card, do what it says. And you're going to be having various objectives and missions along the way in order to achieve them to affect the ultimate end game victory or to help mitigate circumstances along the way. So it's sort of a 4 or even 5-pronged approach as you're pursuing different elements and balancing them in this game. And then it just flips through here, one after another, until you get to the very end one that tells you, here is the end game scenario. This is what you have to do in order to win or lose. Now that you have, sort of gone through the ringer or the fire, if you will. Let me show you what the setup looks like as you go through more of the player turns and the actions, and then I will explain a little bit more about the problems, the incidences, and the events that essentially the AI or the game itself is throwing at you. Let's take a look. So here's what the initial basic setup of the game looks like. This is a 2-player setup just to give you a gist of what it's going to look like. You start out the game as a hero in the fortress here, and you can see that the fortress itself has a couple different aspects. You have the defenses of the fortress over here that starts at 3, the glory starts over 3. If either of these reach 0, you automatically lose. You have icons around the outside that will buffer that. You also have icons around the outside that will give you resources. And so you're going to be trying to resource management, utilize these in order to stave off the victory conditions or the defeat conditions that you're going to be managing in the Chronicle. We'll talk about the Chronicle board and the enemy board or the AI board here in a minute, but I'm going to run you through most of the player actions first. So when you're on the board, on your turn, you have several different options. One is just to move from area to area to area to area. And you can only move one time because most characters, except for one, won't allow you to do any action more than once on your turn unless you're Conrad. So this is a basic player board here with Conrad. He has his health, that you start off full health. He has an ability that says 2 regular actions can be the same. And then he has this icon, which is going to go to ability checks. Then you have someone like Ernest, who has a different icon ability check, different level or same level of ability that causes fatigue. And then when you resolve a problem, he gets to use the community reward right away as if he used it on his action. So the second thing you can do is you can build if you're in the fortress. And how do you build? Well, you get these resources that I mentioned, and you're going to be gathering these resources. And when you gather these resources, they go communally into the fortress, but you have to be in the fortress on your turn to be able to utilize them. And you can build buildings that you're going to start off with down here, or from the selection that is going to give you at the beginning of the game, as well as towers that are going to sit in the corner. You have 2 different types of towers, one that costs a fire and a brick, and another that is going to cost just a leaf. And these will come important in a second here, and we'll talk about why that is. So the other action that you can do here is build the towers. Then you can also repair. If something gets damaged, you have to use the little action ability check to repair. But the third thing that you're going to be doing is you're going to be going to these locations and utilizing these areas that I mentioned, either to get the glory or to get the resource that's there. There's also one that allows you to exchange items for items, and then one that gives you full health, and then one that gives you tower defense. Now, the last option that you have here is you can go to one of these areas and pick up one of these incident cards and do what it says. And they give you a little hint of what it is, fragments of the past. You flip it over and it tells you, without any spoilers, you're doing an ability check based on fighting. And then based on how many successes you get, rewards or detriments, but then it's removed no matter what.
And so the importance of that is if you can get rid of all of the incident cards in an area, you can place down one of these little green shields if you also have the corresponding tower that covers that quadrant. And what happens then is later when we talk about the enemy board, the AI board, is if you have to go to place one there, this is already secured. It can't be placed one there. It's one less area you're going to have to try to pandemic-esque control. The problem, though, is that if that happens in an area you don't have, you put down one, and then that icon becomes a red, becomes more Metal Gear Solid-esque, right? And so if that happens again, you can potentially be losing glory for each one of those on the board when this icon goes around on the enemy board another time. Now, I also talked about the fact that securing areas is good. It plays twofold because not only with the scenario that you're going to be doing, you're also going to be having these individual Chronicle objectives that are going to give you extra bonuses in terms of helping you complete the mission in some way, shape, or form that varies depending on the scenario. So for this case, you need to have 2 of these areas secured to get this bonus. You need to have an additional one. This is not 1, this is additional 1. So 3 total, plus you have to have the grand hall built. And then this, you have to have 4 total, then the sum, and you have to have 4 problem cards completed. Now let's talk about problem cards for a second, because these problem cards are also on that AI board that I mentioned. And what happens is they cover up these resource spots so that you can no longer use them until you complete them. And what happens is you have the ability checks again, and you have to get a certain number of successes, or you maybe even have a resource that needs to be given in those senses. Now, the nice thing is you don't have to have these all done in one turn. You could take 1 turn, you could take 2 turns, you could take many turns to get 2 successes depending on how many dice you're rolling. And these dice that you're rolling are nice because they've got successes, they've got blanks, but they've also got a side that says if you give up one of your health, you can also get a success. Now, that matters because the health on these guys only is so much, and if they go below a certain level, they lose their special ability that they get. Now, with that rest, though, you also get, as an action, it's the last action I did not mention, a heart back, but you also get a piece of bread. If you get 2 pieces of bread, that allows you to get a bonus action where you can actually repeat what other action you've done to help you mitigate things. 1 bread alone allows you to reroll, but 2 bread gives you that bonus that is also important. Now, you'll also notice the icon here. And so the ability checks here are going to matter because it depends on what buildings you've built, because also all of the buildings will have various icons on them as well. And you can see this is what it costs to build. This is what it gives you in terms of the inn. So if I built the inn here, for example, all of a sudden I have 1 of the icons for all the 4 starting classes, and then I have 2 of these and a fighting. So that fighting icon that I showed you on that problem or that objective, the incident right here, I would have 2 dice that I would get to roll any time that we had to do that objective. Now, if I happen to be Ernest and we happen to get one of these, I would have 1 there in the fortress, 2 in the tavern, 3 of the inn, and then he would actually get 4 dice to roll to help him get more successes on an ability check that utilize that icon. But you're trying to balance these with these and with just what everything else that's sort of going on in that sense. So let me show you the other board, and so you can make sense of what's happening on the enemy's turn, so how these things are sort of propagating and influencing and timing-wise coming out on the board. Now, I mentioned to you about the Chronicle matching here, that you're going to get these additional objectives, and this is a different one, but you'll see that the top of these cards has 2 different icons, and that corresponds to whatever cards you're going to be bringing out in the incidents, because there are a whole host of different ones that you can be getting in that sense of different colors and different mixings and matchings that are going to give you different combinations with the 6 different scenarios that you're given, or chronicles that you're given in this case. So what happens in this game is you're going to slowly progress the AI along this route until it goes back here. And so what you're doing at the beginning of every turn is you're rolling the enemy die before you do all those actions that I mentioned on your turn. So you roll it and you do what it says. You correspondingly move it 1 space. Then you look at this, you draw one of these, that's what it says, and you roll the location die. Okay, I rolled a 4. This would go to location 1, 2, 3, 4 on the board. I put 1 down, that's where the red marker would come up because all of a sudden there's 4 on there. Or if the green marker shield was there, I wouldn't be able to put 1 down. Okay, great, rinse and repeat. So then, if it goes to this next spot, you draw one of the problem cards that I mentioned. That's going to cover up, again, based on a D8, the area. Now, if this is full, if say area 7 over here was full, then you go next clockwise order would be covered into area 8, but if all the ones get filled, if you have all 8 problems filled, you also lose in that sense. The last thing that you'll see on this board is you're going to see the event cards, and these event cards happen. There are instantaneous ones here, the Bugbear Raid. If you have 3 tower defense or less, all rangers lose a health. But you also have ones that are going to be taking effect and stay in effect until you get to this the next time. This one, Bone Chilling Wind. Winter wind blows and chilling the bodies and minds. Each ranger who performs a test loses 1 heart afterwards. So all those ability checks that I mentioned previously to get rid of the incidences and the problems, you're going to be losing health now to go along with that. Now, you get to the end here, and then, like I said, it circles back around. And anytime you stop there, you draw a card off the top of the Chronicle, which is the scenario, essentially. Now, if you rolled this, you stay in the same place, which can be a boon or a curse. Also, if you get to the end and you roll the double, you actually don't go 2 like you would any other time. You always stop here and do the Chronicle. So you flip it over, you read what it says, you get whatever bonuses or detriments, and then the next picture gives you a clue of what might be going on next, or a little bit of insight into the one that actually just happened, if you will. Now, this one in particular has about 13 cards in it, so you can see there's a little bit of everything in terms of what you're going to be seeing running into, as well as different options, until you get to the end, which are minor or major victories, or even losses altogether. And so the end game is really when you get through this deck until it gives you the final condition that you may or may not want to win or lose with. And so these icons, like I said, are going to help you mitigate this and give you additional ways to do so, and give you ways of counting it additionally. And there are going to be things that modify these. There are going to be things that modify these. There are going to be ways that you're going to be manipulating it across the board, literally, figuratively speaking. And then, of course, burning it in the village, burning it in the village. That being said, let's go to my final thoughts.
So Oltree, as you can see, is a very interesting combination of things that you may recognize, as well as just some slight nuances and twists on the formulaic composition that is out there in a cooperative sense already. What does it do well? Actions need to be meaningful. There is not, in some of the other games that do similar actions and resources, the sense of despair that often is brought about. I'm looking at you, Ghost Stories. I'm looking at you, Last Bastion, where it just always feels out of reach, and not just slightly, right? Like significantly out of reach, where it constantly feels like you're being waterboarded instead of just barely treading water and floating by, right? It does a nice balance from that standpoint. Also, the ability to secure the areas around the edge of the board is very rewarding when you're rolling those incident dice to see where you're putting a new one down, and you end up rolling the location that is already secured, and it's really a significant relief in that sense. It makes you feel like you are progressing through that. The ability to utilize resources communally also is a nice change that we're not seeing in some of these other cooperative situations, where it really truly is everyone for themselves working together. This is really everyone working together, because also a lot of the scenarios will allow you to say, okay, the best person for this skill check, ability check, rolls the dice. Doesn't force you into saying, okay, you do it. Okay, you do it. Okay, everybody do it. And, if only. So it gets away from that trope that we have seen more of recently. The use of the scenario books to flip through them and to constantly keep you guessing in terms of what's coming up next is also well done. I enjoyed that, going, okay, what's the next test going to be? Now, on the flip side, let's talk about things that I did not like, or things that I have concerns about. And let's just stay right there with that topic for a second, right? That book is incredibly frustrating at the same time. It gives you absolutely no hint into what the final objective, or how you're going to be rated or achieve victory or loss will occur. Really, and I'll tell you, there's a little bit of spoilers here, so you can skip over this next section if you want. The opening scenario that it has you play through, you get those little objective tokens, and it gives you additional successes. And so you go into the rest of the scenarios thinking that those are going to give you successes. Spoilers, they don't. They are all different, and those are going to give you different effects in different scenarios. And so it sort of sets you up for an initial rug being swept out of your feet situation when you realize that in the other scenarios. And spoilers right here. The way they utilize those and the way you can mix and match them is really cool to give you a slight variation on the scenario that you were playing for the same time. However, it's still the same scenario. We have 6 scenarios, and I played through all of them. Now, I will be hard-pressed to remember all of the nuances, especially at the end of the scenarios, in terms of what I really need to min-max to do in terms of which ability check here and which ability check there. But it just doesn't give you any information to go off of. If you're playing this through the first time, it's sort of like Kingdom Death in the sense that you just don't have a clue, and you're probably going to lose because you don't know. And only the second time through, because you know a little bit of what you have to do, will you have a chance at winning. And I say a chance at winning because between the dice rolls and the enemies landing where you don't want to land them, it still may not matter. And that's really sort of the frustrating aspect about this game in that sense, is that even if you do everything right, you still can have very little chance to win a couple of these scenarios because of how little setup or advanced knowledge you are given. And so there's not a way to deduce it, right? You would think that based on a fighting scenario where you see a certain enemy, you're going to be doing more fighting, and then all of a sudden you're doing knowledge, and or all of a sudden you're doing the insight one, right? Out of the blue. And if you just didn't have a couple of those extra buildings down to give you a couple extra dice to roll, and that's really where the mixed feeling, I guess, comes from, that is the ability checks, the dice rolls. I like the fact that it says, you want to sacrifice a health? You can get an extra success here, or you can get a success here. But I really did not like the fact that you just sometimes needed extra successes at the end of the games, not necessarily during the game, because the individual incidents, you very rarely need more than one, let alone more than 2. And so that is done very smoothly in those aspects. But it sort of just jumps at the end there too significantly, without too much advanced warning, without like hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge sort of thing to say, hey, psst, psst, focus on this. Or, hey, focus on this. You know, a little Navi from, Zelda shouting over your ear, hey, Link, listen up. That sort of thing. It needs just something else there. And the last aspect of things that is going to be very mixed is, like I mentioned, there's only 6 of these scenarios, right? And so I played through all of them in 2 days. Now I gangbustered through them so I could do this review and talk to you about it very succinctly, because I also hate doing reviews where people are like, oh, this massive campaign game just came to me, 3 days ago, and I've already put out my review of it. Oh, it's only got 20 scenarios and you only did 3 of them and you're giving me a full video review. That drives me crazy. So I went through all of this and I said, yeah, they're varied enough that you're doing different things in enough. At the same time, my recommendation for this can't be a full go out and get this either, right? Because it's only got the 6 scenarios. And if they could look me in the eye and say, hey, look, we've got just a small box expansion for like 15, 20 bucks, and it's going to have 4 more scenarios in it, then this would be, oh yeah, keep this on my shelf. It's got enough uniqueness in the mechanics and the hopping around and the 3 different things at each site that you're having to sort of mitigate or choose how you're going to use it, that is intuitive and nice enough that it's distinctly different than other things in my collection. It's very much akin to the Lucky Duck games Destinies, where once you've sort of played it through, like similar with Destinies, you just don't know where stuff is in certain areas and objectives and stories. And so only playing it through the second time are you actually going to be able to have a significant chance at doing what it needs you to do. And that is both intriguing, but it's also incredibly, incredibly frustrating. So once you get through it, you might also be just very tempted to trade it away and never think about it again, right? And I guess that's okay if you're doing it sort of in the Exit styles or the Destinies-esque game. But nowadays, I'm looking for games that I'm not just going to complete and trade away. I want to complete them and want to play them again. And that's where necessarily a lack of future involvement or updates on knowledge on that about how well this will be supported, as solid as it is by itself, it's worth playing, but I don't know if it's worth keeping, if that makes sense. It's a great one to play and trade. And how do you feel about buying a game knowing that that's potentially what you're going to do? So there you go. Those are my final thoughts on Oltree. So check it out if you're interested. Throw a link down below. As always, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for watching. Stay classy. See you around.